I'm excited to share with you all a topic that I think is widely applicable no matter what kind of writing that you do, from cover letters to social media to proposals to whatever kinds of technical or other professional writing you do. I think that these 4 tips really apply across the board. I'm sharing my screen right now. There should be a link in the chat. I think it's still there, Elaine. Basically, 4 fast ways to fix everything you write, and we're just going to dive in. One of the things that I see all the time is what I call throat clearing. It refers to the short throwaway preface that you put at the beginning of what you're writing in order to help you organize your thoughts. Some really good examples are, today I'm going to talk about, or there are many kinds of blank, or why do people blank? Or I was blanking the other day when suddenly blank happened. Those kinds of statements are basically the author trying to get in the right headspace to write. And they're not really valuing what the audience is thinking about. They're not really trying to capture the audience's attention in that moment. And that's a problem. Like, that's really what we want to do from the very, very first word, is to start pulling your audience into your story. And so how do you fix it? It's okay to clear your throat. We do it for a reason. It actually helps us, but we have to go back and we have to find instances of throat clearing, even like the beginning of a new paragraph somewhere down the line, and we've got to pull those out. We've got to pull them out or find someone else to help us locate those instances of throat clearing and pull them out. Secondly, another issue I see a lot is clutter. And clutter refers to the extra words or details or even syllables that just kind of delay getting to your point. The idea is that you want to tell your story as quickly as you can. The more you value your audience's time, the more likely they are to stay engaged with what you're writing. Unless you're like James Joyce or some phenomenal author, probably most of the writing that we all do is something that has to be succinct. So here's an example. I was editing a website for a landscape photographer recently, and I came across this sentence. At the beginning, I took pictures of the places I have been to, but they were only just average snapshots that any tourist would have taken. And while that sentence isn't phenomenal, it's not actually that wrong grammatically, but it's way too long, especially for the internet. So I changed it to, at first, I took pictures of places I went, but they were just snapshots any tourist would take. And see how that takes the core of what was said and puts it into a much smaller package. We need to aggressively simplify our grammar, and we want to replace passive voice and extra like adjectives and adverbs and prepositional phrases with active voice, with compelling verbs, those kinds of things. And that's a bit of an art, but with practice, it really makes a big difference. And it's really about recognizing where clutter is and removing it. Third, there's this idea of a story arc. Every message has a beginning and a middle and an end. And that end has to reference all of the things that came before it. So that's called closing the story arc. And here's some ways that we organize information. So for example, a creative story or even like a travel blog might have a setting and a conflict and a resolution. A case study or an advertisement will have a problem, a solution, and a call to action. Even in comedy, you've got a setup, a comedic pause, a punchline. And in academic writing or in like a professional position paper, you're going to have an attention getter, a credibility statement, and a thesis statement. And that's just in the introduction. So even the introduction alone is a beginning and a middle and an end in that instance. And the key here is they all need to flow together. And the end has to recognize the things that came before it. So I was working with another landscape photographer. You can tell where my hobbies are. Basically, I was helping him write a book, and he would have these stories like, I rolled out of the tent and it was raining and it was miserable, but I wanted to get the picture. So I went hiking through the mud and the rain, and I got there and I took this picture. And while that's an interesting sort of story, that conclusion doesn't mention the conflict of the rain and the weather being an obstacle. So I went in and I line edited and looking at things like, well, the weather cleared and I got this beautiful light, or actually the bad weather made for a better picture overall, which I didn't expect. Those kinds of conclusions help complete that story arc. How do you fix this? I like to draw a mental box around the beginning and the middle and the end. And I want to make sure that the beginning includes all of the necessary information, so I'm not having to fill in the gaps haphazardly later on. The middle has to be amping up that interest, and the call to action or the conclusion at the end needs to reference what came before it. And as a bonus tip, if you discover that your ending can't accommodate the details from the beginning and the end, or the beginning and the middle, excuse me, then those details are probably clutter to be removed. And finally, there's space, white space, and what I call hooks. White space breaks your message into pieces that lets readers relax. It helps them stay oriented within the flow of your narrative or your documentation. It also helps readers digest details and kind of even live in the suspense and the emotion that you're building. The drawback with white space is that if a reader is going to stop reading your stuff, it's going to happen in white space. And so you need to have a strong hook immediately before that white space to keep your reader's attention across that white space and to re-engage afterwards. So common examples of white space, frequent paragraph breaks, especially online. I also like to see some good white space around keystone graphics. It just draws the eye to the thing that's most important. Even if you're giving a verbal presentation, having a pause is kind of like white space between, what I'm about to say is really important, or I'm shifting from analysis to suggestions. And a line break even in your social media between the commentary and the link that follows it. That even just helps the eye understand the hierarchy of what you're putting into that tweet. And some really good hooks that I like, an unanswered question, and not necessarily one that has a question mark, but just kind of planting an idea in a reader's mind. Strong emotions are a great place for a hook. Foreshadowing and also previewing the next point in kind of nonfiction writing. That stuff is really critical for keeping your audience engaged across paragraphs, across pages, across chapters. And how can you fix this stuff? I like to split long sections of text after the most compelling moment. And in like a technical document, for instance, that might be a stretch to call it compelling, but you got to find the most salient or interesting piece of information in there. And that's usually a really good place to kind of add a paragraph break, add some sort of a break, add some white space to keep your reader engaged. And I also like to highlight keystone content with the most prominent white space and ensure that the last sentence before white space gives your audience a reason to return. And just as one final bonus tip for you, once your paragraph's aspect ratio becomes a square, prepare to add a paragraph break. And depending on the size of the paper, it probably needed to come way before that. Okay, so I want to take some questions. If we don't get to your question, you can feel free to drop it in here on this form, look me up on social media. I'm also doing a technical writing workshop next month. It's 8 hours over 2 days on fundamentals. And finally, I just want to say thanks again to Elaine and 52 Limited for letting me come and share with you today. There's all kinds of great upcoming topics and webinars that have been recorded for you to check out. So again, thank you so much for the chance to share today. And I'd love to hear if you have any questions.